and its strength. Royal Chinette is molded out of fiber, not pressed out of paper. So Royal Chinette won't droop in the heat, it won't leak or fold under pressure. In fact, Royal Chinette is 6 times stronger than ordinary paper plates. And it looks just beautiful, thank you. Royal Chinette, strong is beautiful.
BCTV, our best show.
Good morning. There's not much doubt that the province of British Columbia is drifting at this moment. It's in a bad economic state. Unemployment, etc., countervailing duties and other problems. The cutting of government services to the poor. But would Dave Barrett, the leader of the NDP, the man who wants to be Premier again of this province, would he really like to take over in the middle of this mess now, and could he do any better? Let's ask him after the break. Before we turn to the major problems in British Columbia, I want to tell you, Mr. Barrett, that the office of Mr. Broadbent is sitting agog at the end of a phone in Ottawa to see what you have to say on the subject of whorehouses and red light districts and warehouse portions of Vancouver. Now let me explain. This is what I extracted from Sven Robinson, the NDP MP for Burnaby, who presented that more or less to me as firm federal policy. Mark Rose was on yesterday, and Mark said, no, the federal policy of the NDP is that if the subject comes up, the NDP position is that to decriminalize prostitution, to take the body section out of the criminal code, and to allow municipal bylaws to deal with any pests or nuisances, such as red light districts and warehouse areas. Do you agree with the federal NDP policy?
No, I don't. I've made that clear before. It's simply not consistent with our own cultural structure in Canada. Certainly there have been some changes in the United States, but I don't agree with that position in Canada.
You don't agree with Sven Robinson's extrapolations to red light districts?
No.
You don't agree with the federal NDP caucus on it?
No.
To remove the body section from the criminal code?
There is more rational debate about this problem than there has been in the last 20 years, but I don't agree with that position. I don't think culturally and socially we are in any position to deal with that problem in the European experience or some of the experience of the American states.
You are an old square who wants to leave it as it is and hope we can find some kind of solution.
No.
Or do you want an amendment to the criminal code?
I think that we have to begin to examine the consequences of prostitution in terms of the social consequences to the women involved and the degradation of the women involved, and also the customers who have a dual standard in the approach. But legalizing it is not the answer, in my opinion.
In other words, these Eastern MPs and some of your Western colleagues don't know their elbow from a hole in the ground in dealing with the specifics of the problems in the West End of Vancouver and elsewhere.
The problem has changed dramatically in terms of public perception. We even have movies known as The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. To even say that word on radio or television 10 years ago was unforgivable. We had a cabinet minister who went to the play, and that became a cause celeb in this province.
Expense paid, as I recall.
Expense paid by the taxpayer.
You had to bring that in.
Oh, of course.
But he only went to see a performance.
Of course. The point that I'm making is that the acceptability of the discussion of the subject has taken 20 years. We're not ready, and I don't believe in the argument that we should have legalized prostitution. At least we recognize now that there's a problem.
And you don't even want to decriminalize the
No.
sale of sex.
We're not ready, and I don't think that's a valid point. I don't think that in terms of Canadian culture, I don't agree with that position.
Well, will you tell Mark Rose and Sven Robinson that the next time you see them?
They know my position already.
All right, that's out of the way for the moment.
Okay.
Now, what about the economy of this province? Do you believe Bennett when he talks about $1 billion deficit?
It will be about $1.5 billion deficit. We are now going to borrow $50 million a week in Treasury bonds starting this very week in British Columbia. It's the first time in over 30 years, whether it was social credit or NDP governments, the first time we've gone to deficit financing on general revenue expenditure.
And you would compliment Mr. Bennett on having the guts to do it because he's got to pay the grocery bills.
He had no options. I don't compliment anybody who's found themselves in that position. What I disagree with is the false position that the government had been taking over the last 3 years, saying that they will never do it, when in actual fact they were draining the reserve funds left by WAC Bennett and added to by us, and they dissipated the assets, and they have actually been drawing for 3 years, not just this year.
But will you forgive Bennett and Lalonde and Dome and the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce and all the rest of them for thinking that what went up could not come down? I'm sure you were guilty of the same thing.
Well, I cannot give everybody a blanket forgiveness, and whether I do or not, it's irrelevant. The fact is that they were not telling us the truth leading into this situation when they knew better. The current situation in British Columbia was predicted 2.5 years ago. The government's own economists predicted it. Bennett and the cabinet ignored their own advisors in terms of where they were heading.
And you, if you were now in power, could not do any better than he is from the point of view that you would have to be slashing, cutting, saving here and there to pay the groceries.
There is no question. The first thing, you asked at the opening, could you do any better? The first thing that has to be done in British Columbia, the very first thing, is an open book session. We have to open up every Crown corporation, every major contract, every account of the government. We've discovered, as Dave Stupich exposed, the shifting of burdens of cost from BC Place onto the BC Building Corporation. BC Rail is carrying a massive debt on Northeast Coal. The best and first thing that must be done is lay out everything and know exactly what kind of mess we're in, what kind of trouble we're really in.
But we know what kind of trouble
we don't know.
Provincial revenues are down hundreds of millions of dollars.
Jack, in my opinion, it is worse than that. The difficulty is that we get it out in bits, dribbles, and pieces. We've lost all our assets through BRIC. We've lost every penny that we had in the bank that's been spent over the last 3 years. We have Crown corporations borrowing rapidly over each other. We increased the borrowing power of BC Hydro just last session. Now, all of this has to be laid out. It's all our debt, whether social credit incurred it or anyone else. We've got to pay it. Now, the first way to clean up any mess is assess the whole problem. That's what's missing.
And you're being very reasonable, but just look at the situation right now.
Yeah.
What about these teachers? Is it not correct that the teachers, as the enrollment goes down like this and the number of teachers goes up like that they've been pampered beyond belief and expect protection beyond belief?
Well, you make sweeping generalized statements, and that's essential in an interview. However,
I can prove that.
All right,
figure.
there are other people that have been, quote, pampered in our society. All of us have been living in a bit of a dream world, in Canada in particular, North America in general. We have believed that the economy would keep on moving and moving and moving on our resources without any secondary or tertiary investment. Now, when the economy turns down, we start singling out groups. We've all been living fat off the land, Jack, and we're able to single out groups who we see are doing better, or at least are in some sense more secure than we are. The reality is that we have not been honest with each other as Canadians over the past 25 years in resource development, and we're looking for scapegoats. Yes, teachers can cut back. Yes, doctors can cut back. Yes, politicians can cut back. But any cutback, any sacrifice, any appeal to any citizen has to be on a fair and equitable basis. Even a guy like Pocklington makes more sense when he talks about a fixed income tax scale than singling out groups and attacking those groups.
You answered that beautifully with a lovely little homily. If you were in power right now, would you endorse the cutting back of school board budgets to meet the needs?
No, there are other cutbacks. I'm talking about priorities. We offered cutbacks totaling $158 million in advertising, publications, in travel, in furniture, every one of them recorded vote, every one of them, every single one the Socreds voted against. The education budget is down $60 million this year, and yet they've frittered away $152 million in publications, advertising, travel, furniture, and rentals, and we weren't eliminating them, cutting them back to the 81 level, and they voted against those cuts. It's a question of priorities.
You're talking about what might be roughly called internal government waste.
No question about they've just done it again.
Why didn't you hit the big one? Yeah.
Well, that's a current example. $400,000 for a 13-week advertising program, when I charge on this program that those commercials were prepared to be bought by the Social Credit Party for use in an election campaign. The election was not called, and the taxpayers are being stuck with a bill by running really election ads as government propaganda.
I'll describe it. $433,000. How would you describe that? Is that not good? Does it not boost the morale of the people here who knows that the government is building big things? Northeast Coal, BC Stadium.
Jack, can you cash in those ads when you go to your bank? Does it help anybody waiting on a welfare line or unemployment insurance line to spread that kind of propaganda? And it surely was. It does benefit people like Dave Brown, who charged $135,000.
Dave Brown, who's Dave Brown?
He's the former aide to Bill Bennett.
What does he do now?
He runs Gem Productions.
Oh, so he made that for social credit.
Exactly.
Total cost $433,000.
$433. It was $133 for production. When Premier Bill Bennett gets on and tells you to show restraint, caution, I appeal to everybody, cooperation, and then it's his office that authorizes those kind of expenditures, plus $72,000 for a survey to see whether or not you agree with premarital sex, as if somehow that had something to do with the
All right,
economy.
describe Bennett's managerial abilities from where you're now sitting on the outside just dying to get into that office.
Look, I don't profess to have all the solutions. I don't profess that my party knows all the answers. The first place to start is in the world of reality. Bill Bennett is not in the world of reality. I haven't said it as clearly as Barbara Foxwell, the head of the Social Credit Auxiliary, Women's Auxiliary, said. He has surrounded himself with public relations hacks. He lives and breathes by polls and polling. He has removed himself with contact with ordinary people. He has not seen bread lines or soup kitchens in Alberni or in Campbell River. He believes in almost whimsy by poll. That's not government, Jack. That is a runaway mentality.
Dave Barrett, leader of the NDP and leader of the opposition in the legislature of Victoria, after the break. It's almost certain in the next election, Mr. Barrett, that you'll get the apple for the teachers from the BC Teachers Federation again, isn't it?
Look, whether or not the teachers are singled out as political attacks or doctors are singled out for political attacks, what they do with it politically is not really the issue. The issue is, are we really reducing ourselves in British Columbia to single out separate groups for political attacks, just as the civil servants were for a short period of time, just as the doctors, just as the teachers? Everybody has to give in this society.
But even Van der Zam has got to look at the budget and say that's all there is. So let's take away 5 professional days. Let's not give them the right to negotiate working agreements. Is that not a sane thing to do in time of recession?
It is a sane thing to look at the whole picture and decide what are priorities. Advertising is not a priority. That goes first. Travel, that's not a priority. That goes. The problem with this government...
Aren't you the guy that bought the fleet of planes for the cabinet ministers and for air-sea rescue?
For the ambulance service, the most that I ever used the government aircraft in any single year was 17 times. I went on Air BC with everybody else and traveled from harbor to harbor, as I still do.
All right, what do you say of their $1.4 million expenditure in government planes? And what do you think of cabinet ministers, and I'm feeding this to you, who commute like McGeer and Nielsen from Victoria to Vancouver on virtually a daily basis?
Does it serve any purpose for me to heap condemnation on stupid acts? The fact is that someone, as a cabinet minister, consciously made a decision at a time of restraint to go home and back every day on a government aircraft. What good does Dave Barrett do by saying that's terrible? The fact is that...
Would you stop it?
Of course I would stop it. But Bill
What do you
Bennett is
mean?
incapable of dealing with these flagrant abuses. He's even got an aide that sits up there in Kelowna, an assistant to him, a brother-in-law's brother that gets $50,000 a year to sit up there fanning
Who
himself.
would that be?
That is Mr. Tozer. Jack, the hypocrisy of this government in terms of saying we've got to cut here, cut here, cut here, and there are cuts necessary. But to be believed, Jack, you must show priorities, you must show some willingness to cut those areas that you're involved in yourself.
Like one particularly esoteric health group that you started with grants called Action BC, $400,000 a year is going to be wiped out now, and so it should be.
It should be, and it should have been.
You started
Of
it.
course, and there were programs that we started when the economy was good that we could afford them. When the economy is not good, you cut them out. But you don't start off the top by cutting education. Education is the last place we cut. Now, there are probably some areas in education where we can cut, but to be believable, to have it acceptable, particularly for parents, then they have to believe that there is some philosophy behind it, there is some purpose, and some consistency, not hypocrisy.
And some previous study.
Exactly.
I mean, old Van der Zam came in and said, take 60 million out. He didn't look or examine at the vast number of highly paid administrators in whom we are consistently feather-bedded, and neither did you when you were in.
Look, Jack, there were cuts that we made when we were in office, and I can go over them, and they were things that were obvious. There are cuts that are obvious, but you must do it in consultation and with some plan in mind. Last night in Vancouver, I met with a very small group of parents just to discuss with them the impact of the cuts. One of the parents has a handicapped child. That child's services will be cut. The teacher's aides will be cut for special students. What about students that should be accelerated? It is the special services, those things that Van der Zam views as extras, that are being threatened. There are other methods of chopping.
You must confess, so it's very difficult to get inside on what's happening on school boards and what's happening from the teacher's point of view when all of us suspect that it's the little people at the bottom that are going instead of golden handshakes for the feather-bedded people at the top.
Look, I don't disagree that what you say may be true. The problem, Jack, is you have Van der Zam, who is deliberately making provocative statements about a very difficult problem, looking for political advantage. There must be cuts in all kinds of areas. Everybody with any brain of common sense understands that. But it is hypocrisy for the government to be squandering money in one area and attacking a group in another area.
I had the U.S. ambassador here the other day who looked down his nose very strongly at you,
that, yeah.
says he's not in office, after you had threatened if they dared to apply countervailing duties to cut off natural gas and brown out their lights.
I saw that.
Do you want to repeat that threat, or did you make that in a moment of...
I did not make a threat. I said those are the natural consequences that even President Reagan talks about in trade wars. The President of the United States has taken an entirely different position than some of his own senators and that commission. The President, Mr. Reagan, has said that countervailing tariffs bring about countervailing tariffs. The ambassador obviously doesn't know his own president's position on this issue. What I said was that if they go ahead with the tariffs on trades, somebody is going to suggest that we start cutting back on power and gas and oil. I will be like an American politician in an American jurisdiction protecting our turf. The last time this happened, it had to be settled politically between a phone call of Lester Pearson's and President Johnson. What I'm warning is that if...
That was on the Columbia River.
No, it was on the same move on tariffs before. This is a second rerun, and it had to be terminated politically, and it was terminated. Now, the Council of Forest Industries and the IWA are cooperating magnificently. The unions and management are doing a first-class job. The American senators, led by Mr. Packford, who is an American senator who has been aggressive and somewhat in a condemnatory language against Canadian lumber, has created a political atmosphere that has to be countervailed in this country.
One threat deserves another.
Look, they have to understand that what Reagan is talking about in terms of countervailing threats will come in existence if they go ahead with these tariffs.
Now, I know you damn Bennett for breaking up BRIC and privatizing it, to use that horrible word.
Okay.
But once again, he's stuck. BRIC and BC Timber are stuck with the same economic slowdown.
Look, but what's worse, Jack, is that most of those corporations that we acquired were debt-free. The only debt load was on Cancel, which had a $69 million mortgage at 6%. We had $450 million worth of assets. And we paid $40 million for them. The only debt was the $69 million. He turned all of that into a $700 million debt load known as BRIC, and now he's trying to divest himself of some of those assets.
His biggest mistake?
No question about it. And thousands of people, some of whom are watching this show right now, saw Bill Bennett, heard his appeal to go and buy shares. He was flogging shares. He told people to go and buy those shares. They went out and borrowed money to buy those shares on the word of Bill Bennett. And people have lost small fortunes, in relative terms, small fortunes because of that advice.
Webster and Dave Barrett after the break. A number of unions have taken no wage increases. I can think of KMAW, for instance.
Yeah.
I know the fight, and you know the fight Monroe's going to have, wage increases, even fewer jobs.
Yeah.
Can you say to the trade union movement of British Columbia, now is the time to be reasonable and not demand wage increases?
I can say to the trade union movement, I can say to the banks, I can say to the oil companies, now is the time for everybody to be cautious about wages and prices and profits. But I will not single out the trade unions without mentioning the fact that the banking profits, that the oil profits are still very, very high. Even though they've come down a bit, they're still very high. One thing I agree with Trudeau about in terms of his comments, I don't agree with his methods. It's everybody's fight. You don't just single out one particular group. Everybody is going to have to be cautious.
But surely the Libs are basically to blame for much of our troubles with the national energy policy which you support.
I don't support that foolish national energy
policy. It's a move towards socialism, a move towards nationalization.
If you remember the position I took in 1973 that Bill Bennett still talks about, I said public control of all oil and gas from coast to coast by the federal government on the same basis as the BC Petroleum Corporation, which Bill Bennett quietly has embraced as his own.
A tax-gathering body.
Exactly. I said the marketing agency offshore should be in the hands of government. It has made the people of British Columbia $1.3 billion. I said in 1973, when boom times were on, the federal government should be doing the same thing, and if they did, we in British Columbia would cooperate so that Canadians from coast to coast would benefit.
Isn't it about time we cut our natural gas prices at the border so we can sell some?
No.
Why not?
There is
the sales are way down.
Yes, and they'll be down for another 2 or 3 years. But that is temporary. What has happened is that because through the BCPC, we forced the federal government to start levering the price of gas up. The Mexicans were way ahead of us. We finally caught up to the Mexicans. The Americans had been keeping reserves privately held by those major oil companies. They waited till the foreign price went up, then started uncapping old gas in the States. When that is used up, they will be forced to come back to buy from Mexico and buy from us.
Do you say, like members of the construction unions, this is my presumption, God bless Bennett because of a couple of things? BC Rail expansion, Northeast Coal expansion, the building of the stadium on target and on time, and the further development of BC Place as the only kind of major projects going in the province at the moment.
Jack
Therefore,
Webster,
you must compliment him.
Jack Webster, the decision to go ahead with Northeast Coal was not made on the basis of Northeast Coal or nothing. We're spending $1.5 billion of taxpayers' dollars. I said then, and I repeat, had I had the choice would have been for other construction projects, other investments in British Columbia, not all our eggs in one basket.
You'd have left the Northeast Coal on the ground.
The reason being, we're now going to force Northeast Coal to be competing with Southeast Coal. The towns of Cranbrook, the towns of Fernie, the towns of Sparwood are now suffering because of the Japanese cutbacks. The Japanese are in that horribly predicted position of whipsawing the market, a shrinking market in Japan, and having two regions in BC compete with each other. You talk to the mayors of Sparwood on this show, the mayor of Cranbrook and the mayor of Fernie, and tell them what they're feeling by the Japanese cutbacks. You have an admission by Mr. Bassford on this very show that they've only sold and contracted up to 7.7 million tons of coal. So, Jack, if you ask me would I have a choice, had the choice been mine, I would have not gone ahead with Northeast Coal. That $1.5 billion would have been invested in sewers, roads, sidewalks, secondary industrial development in this province. We should have been in an LNG plant and secondary manufacturing a long time ago. We should have had our own joint ownership refinery in this province a long time ago.
And now if you did come into power, the economy is such that all you could do would be to bookkeep in Victoria.
No, there are aggressive moves that we can make. I am convinced after my trip to Japan 2 years ago that we are in a position to renegotiate for value added on that Japanese contract. I am convinced that the rail car plant, the Socreds closed, can and should be reopened. I am convinced that we can negotiate with the Japanese steel companies for a small domestic steel mill in British Columbia. I'm convinced that we can get secondary investment
Now,
related to our resources.
Totally separate question. Are you in favor of a totally unionized workplace at Tumbler Ridge townsite? Because the BCYT, Trades Building Council, wants every job from Tumbler Ridge west of the coast to be fully union and no non-union work at all.
I will not comment on that dispute until the Labor Relations Board comes down with its ruling. Remember, the Labor Relations Board is a quasi-judicial body accepted under the Labor Code of British Columbia. To comment on the dispute like Mr. Phillips has done has taken away a very good vehicle for the trade unions, for management to settle disputes. When that dispute is over and the decision is down from the LRB, I'll make a comment.
Well, I'll make a comment on it.
Well, you go ahead, but you'll be in the same category as Mr. Phillips, and I don't want to ever accuse you of doing that.
I'm a realist on the subject. You know perfectly well that you can't arbitrarily wipe out all non-union workers in a province, even if one is a dedicated unionist and socialist like yourself.
Look, when you sign contracts and there's a dispute over that specific contract...
Non-affiliation clauses.
All right. When that is disputed, that must be settled by the Labor Relations Board, not by myself, not by Don Phillips. We can have observations over it, but you wait until the system coughs up the answer.
Anyway, you're quite clear. You wouldn't have built BC Place. You wouldn't have
I didn't say we wouldn't have built BC Place. I said Northeast Coal.
You wouldn't have gone for Northeast Coal
No.
at that time.
At that time, at that price.
Now you would renegotiate.
You have to renegotiate. Have to renegotiate.
I'm surprised you haven't attacked him on the renter's tax credit.
I have attacked him on the renter's tax credit.
This morning?
Yes, and earlier too, and the editorials have done it. But people are becoming inured to the callousness of this government. Inured. They're conditioned.
Inured.
They're buffered. Okay, like both of us are well buffered. People are so used to being beat about by the Socreds that it becomes a one-day phenomena to criticize these things. But those cutbacks are really going to hurt people who can't afford to be
That's
hurt.
a 72 million reduction from the income tax for those who were entitled to rental tax credits.
A good program brought in by the Socreds, and they deserved credit for it when they brought it in. Now they're eliminating it.
Stupidly and unwisely eliminated.
Terrible mistake because it's hurting the low-income people and the elderly. And the elderly. Now, the other one, the renter's grant, was started by us and kept by the Socreds. Both of those are being eliminated. It hurts the people who least can afford to be hurt.
But he was probably right to wipe out the Dentacare for 65s and overs, because it became a massive expense.
If you're going to go through,
regardless of income.
if you're going to go through a list of priorities and cut, and anybody in the government has to cut, you have to have a range of cuts. We offered, as I repeated earlier, $152 million of cuts that they haven't done. Jack, it doesn't hurt a cabinet minister to travel economy on the airplane once in a while. It doesn't hurt. They don't need to go
Did
for...
you travel economy?
Yes, I did, and I got attacked for it. I was criticized for traveling economy.
Well, you got a worker's image.
Okay.
Did you fill in the social credit, what's it called, Canadian Polling Institute?
$70,000.
Did you fill it in?
No, someone put it in the mail to us.
Well, I want you to fill in part of it now.
All right, tell me.
Okay, are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
Just a minute, I want to get a bit. Oh, yes. Listen, Just let's have a little laugh.
All right.
Are you strongly in favor of giving the are you in favor of giving the school teachers the right to strike? Strongly, somewhat opposed, or strongly opposed?
They already have it.
What? Are you in favor?
Yes, I am in favor of the right for
Strongly
everybody.
in favor.
Free collective bargaining and free for society.
And teachers should have the right to strike.
Of course.
Okay. Are you in favor of the legalization of casino gambling in British Columbia?
Absolutely not.
Strongly opposed.
Strongly opposed.
Are you? This is crazy. Are you in favor of premarital sexual relations?
It all depends who with. This is crazy. This is the craziest.
I'll give you a chance to answer that again. Are you in favor?
That's none of Bill Bennett's business.
None of his business.
Look, this shows you the ridiculous level that the Socreds are at. They're spending $70,000 of taxpayers' money to find out if people are in favor.
Look.
It's crazy.
Well,
absolutely crazy.
I hate being nice to you because you're such a smooth talker, you. Well, some of these questions are incredible. I'll do them again.
Look, the question that has to be asked.
Anyway, serious question.
That is paid for by the taxpayers.
Let's go to the phones.
The results should be
What
made
do you mean
available.
that's paid for the taxpayers?
That's paid for by the taxpayers. That is not a social credit survey. That is being paid for by the taxpayers, Jack. That's
How do you know that?
They've admitted it. They have admitted it. Doug Heel has admitted that that is being paid for by the taxpayers. While they're cutting schools and everything else, that is being paid for by the taxpayers. They admit it. And they won't release the results, even though you and I paid for that survey.
There's one question here I didn't ask. It's too rude to put on here. After the break.
Okay.
It's almost a fact, Mr. Barrett, is it not, that the next election will be fought on a straight basis of socialism, godless socialism versus free enterprise. Is that the feel you have?
No, it will not be fought on those old cliches. There has been a dramatic change in political awareness in this province. I think that, and it's changed gradually, but it's dramatic. There is a public debate out there about the role of government in the economy.
We're all afraid of all of you. We think Bennett's a populist and an administrator, Barrett's a social democrat and an administrator.
There is no
Is there much difference between their houses?
Yes, there is.
What's the difference?
There is a great deal of difference. We see the economy serving people instead of the other way around. We believe that the resources should have value added. We do not believe in giveaway of the resources. We believe in caution and prudence in the development of those God-given
Right at the
resources.
moment, are we not in such an economic strait, S-D-R-A-I-T, a straits, that we're almost bound to continue to be hewers of wood and drawers of water?
We will be, for the next generation in this country, the turn down now in the economy, in my opinion, will last for another 3.5 years. We should be using this time for investments in the future. We should be bolstering the options in education so that we have a skilled workforce, particularly in apprenticeship programs. We should be gearing up each municipality, each city towards improving, as Roosevelt did, local services at a time when we have the manpower available, and we should do the funding in advance out of such things as BCPC.
And
Those are the areas
you
that
had
I
a
see.
$300 million plan to advance capital to municipalities. Do you believe that now is the time for massive public deficit spending to create jobs?
We are in massive public deficit spending to buy groceries. I am saying add to that, to build for the future. When the recovery comes, we are in a position both with education and with services to take advantage of it. We should also be sitting down with management and private capital on joint ventures for retooling, remachining, and updating our industrial base to take advantage of the turnaround when it comes, as it will come.
Would you consider taking over some of these plants like K Plywood and running them at a loss to keep the people employed?
We did at once, and we turned a handsome profit. Luckily, we were lucky, I don't deny it, but we were prepared to take the risk, and the risk turned out to be a good one. Had they not gone to BRIC, those debt-free companies that were there were in a position to weather through this storm.
You say they'd still be working?
Yes, they would, because they would not have the debt load that BRIC now has.
But they wouldn't be selling, they'd just be stockpiling.
We would be selling as well. We have not been aggressive in some markets. I've made that speech publicly. I do not think that we have been aggressive in Japan or in China. I do not think we've understood the nature of that Oriental market or the East Asian market, and I think that's an area where we have been underselling.
Let's go to the phones. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
Mr. Barrett, I was just wondering if you would, once you're elected, would go into and look into the Workmen's Compensation Board?
Yes, I'm afraid that the Workmen's Compensation Board has slipped back quite badly in the last few years. The Workmen's Compensation Board cannot and will not become the cure-all and the be-all, but fairness must be the hallmark of the Workmen's Compensation Board.
You think there's a need now for a special inquiry?
Yes, I do. I believe that completely.
Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes?
Yes, I'd like to remind Mr. Barrett, excuse me for being nervous, but the tax burden shows that all voters are not workers, and therefore the union vote will not get him in. He talks about government propaganda. His last platform was an increase of $200 a month for old age pensions, which actually turned out to be $1 a month. And his Farm Act turned out to be stupid, I know, because I'm a farmer. And the fact that you want to ostracize prostitutes by putting them in brothels.
No, he's not concerned with that at all. He said no to that.
At least, Jack,
Okay,
let me
let's
put it
deal
this
with
way.
those
The
two
girls
problems.
are earning their keep.
Okay.
Okay. Well, if that's a sad commentary on this kind of society we live in, if that's the bottom line in terms of at least the girls are earning their keep, frankly, I disagree completely with that statement. Now, two things. We brought in Mincome when we lowered the age to 60, and we paid the full shot. It was Jack Webster who pointed out, rightly, that we in the net had pulled in people who had been in this country 10 years, and it was clear that we paid more than $1, and that system is essentially still in place. The Farm Act. I want to look right in the camera and tell you this, madam. There is not a single farmer in this province who has benefited under the Farm Income Assurance Act brought in by the NDP, attempted to be eliminated by the Socreds, who does not thank goodness that we have that, because we're in a better position in our agriculture community than Ontario is. The Socreds kept that program.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Jack.
Morning.
First of all, I don't know how you can take this man serious this morning. I remember in '73 he claimed he was Robin Hood. During the middle of his term, he was Allende of the North, and now he thinks he's a Roosevelt. He forgot.
Well, I have been called a lot of names.
We have Bill Bennett as our leader and have many of these projects on stream. Instead of studying them at this moment, they're on stream and people are taking advantage and working with them.
My dear
You would
friend.
just be starting your programs down, studying them, and consequently nothing would be done again in a depression time.
You know,
Jack, you forget. Jack, you remember those 2 hydro pensions that this man handed out?
$10,000. $10,000 pension to Casbegs. That's correct.
The guy
And the
worked
other
2 years
fella.
for the
What the other
for
guy?
hydro, and
Wilson.
the guy,
Yeah,
two people each
$10,000.
get
Okay,
$10,000.
hold on.
Yeah.
Item